There have been rumors circulating about the network for some time now, but I believe that I am the first to properly investigate them. I'm certainly the first to share my findings. I'm not going to shove this stuff down your throat or blow it out of proportion. Nor am I going to tell you everything that I saw. I shall not respond to any messages regarding the matter, but I will leave instructions to those of you who are motivated enough to replicate my trip. I don't know if you've ever been to North Wales. Lots of mountains and valleys and very few large towns, mostly rural communities out there. I visited a friend up in Bangor a few times, so I knew the way to the coast. From there, it was a matter of heading south, into the foothills of Mount Snowdon. It took a while to find the old research building. It's been abandoned for years, and so the address wasn't on my sat-nav, but a couple of locals out on the hike pointed me in the right direction. If you plan on heading out there, I'd advise asking around. It's easy to get lost out there in the country roads. Sure enough, there was the sign that I read about. The original words, Gwynedd Climate Research Center, just visible through the fading coat of black paint which had been sprayed across the sign. In their place had simply been dubbed End. Passing this charming exterior, I turned up a narrow path, where the hedges grew tall and tangled with weeds. I'm not talking narrow like, oh, it's going to be awkward if I meet another vehicle coming up the other way. I'm talking grit your teeth the entire way because you can hear the bushes scraping the sides of your car narrow. The road surfaced, turned to gravel, and then angled up sharply. My tires span. The innards creaked painfully, and it quickly became apparent that I wasn't going to make it up. I reversed down the short distance that I'd managed and parked, shrugged on my laptop bag, and pocketed my dad's Maglite. It was a fairly gray morning, and I had no idea what the state of the building's lighting would be in. Buttoning my jacket, I headed up the hill. The front door was not locked, but I set out to check the perimeter. It was pretty much as described in the original online post. Windows boarded, no visible telephone or power lines feeding into the building, and the exterior shell was covered almost entirely with graffiti tags. No vehicles were in sight, and the CCTV cameras hung limp dead in their cages. Good enough for me. The interior was dark, just as I anticipated. I flicked on the Maglite and let it play over grimy walls and dusty floors. Odd that it should seem so undisturbed. One would think that it would be a squatter's heaven, or at the very least, littered with used needles and condom wrappers, as most other abandoned buildings tend to be. The graffiti was still present, but it seemed more hesitant. It was spaced out and faltered the further down the hallway you went. It finally petered out a few feet from the reception desk. The local teenagers had obviously lost their nerve. I found the fuse box behind the desk and flipped a few of the switches experimentally. Nothing happened. Whether the fuses were all blown or there was no power at all, I didn't know. But I definitely did not have the capacity to fix it. The email that I received on the matter specifically stated not to worry about the electricity supply, but, and call me a coward if you like, given a choice between functioning lights and creeping around a dark, isolated building on my own, I'd rather the former. After climbing a bare stairwell to the next floor, I was able to stow my light. The windows here were not boarded up, and great cones of sunlight had crept through the empty frames. The only creepy thing about this place was how tidy it was. Yeah, a thick layer of dust coated everything, and what few furnishings were left had been piled up in the corners of rooms. But there was literally no sign of human disturbance. The sort of place an urban explorer would kill to stumble across, no doubt. I actually felt almost unwelcome there. The closest example that I can think of is when you walk into class really late back in school. Everyone turns to look at you and you feel weirdly unwelcome. Yeah, well, I was getting that same feeling in my stomach when I found the room. It was pretty much as the email had described. A big, open-plan office layout, with marks on the floor and ceiling where the cubicles had once been, and a great reef of office chairs tangled together in one corner. There was only one desk in the room, pushed against a far wall. As I approached it, I noticed that, unlike the rest of the building, it was completely devoid of dust. I pulled the laptop out of my bag and set it down. It was a cheap piece of crap 2000 model, which I'd bought online for about £30, reformatted and installed only the basic functions onto. It was specifically for that excursion. I was not going to gamble my personal machine on an interesting story I'd read on the internet. Once booted up, I produced the network cable. It was an old gray one, the kind you attribute with sketchy dial-up tones and parents complaining about you hogging up the phone lines. One end slotted into the back of the machine, and I looped the other down behind the desk, crouching beneath it, and felt my way along the flaking plaster until my hand brushed the port. My probing fingers discovered a cable already attached, which I unhooked and replaced with my own. When I stood up, I noticed that the cable that I held in my hand was torn, as though the other half had been yanked away so abruptly that the plastic had ruptured and the wires inside snapped. I still have it around my office somewhere, actually. Nothing happened. No icons popped up, announcing that I had successfully connected to the network, and the little signal strength symbol in the bottom right of the screen insisted that I was not online. Puzzled, I checked the printout of the email. No mention of this. Perhaps the power being off was an issue, contrary to the given directions. I called up the CMD window and tried sending a ping. A ping, by the way, is the kind of echoed message that the computer can send out to test a connection. It bounces back or receives a response from other machines and servers on the same network to you. And to my surprise, I received 2 or 3 automated responses. I was online all right. The next given step was the internet. My homepage was set to Google, but strangely, the program spent a good few minutes just on a blank white screen before I was redirected to a different search engine. It was similar to Google in its minimalism, empty background with a central text bar, but the address was www.patriotsearch.com. In place of the Google text logo, there was a simple sketch-style picture of a stoic-faced soldier holding a British flag in one hand and a US one in the other. The words Semper Fidelis were scratched into his helmet. I tried YouTube, but the page briefly 404'd before redirecting me to the Patriot Search website once more. My mouth felt dry as I clicked the search option and headed into the BBC News website. This, it seemed, was still online. As I skimmed the news headlines, any doubts that I had quickly vanished. Second American Civil War grows in size and intensity. U.S. troops redeployed from Afghanistan, Egypt, and Turkey to defend home soil. France and Spain left reeling after terrorists detonate a thermonuclear device on their borders. Police in Texas circulate CCTV images of men believed responsible for the kidnapping and murder of over 50 women since 2008. Handgun bans set to become law across America after last week's White House shooting spree. The US and Britain to allow Australia and Canada to join the Patriot Alliance. UK terrorists continue to murder in border towns, demand Scottish independence. German theoretical physicist arrests by US agents, accused of treason, research on alternate universes, and interdimensional travel amongst confiscated items. I sat back, fumbled a cigarette into my mouth, and lit it. I had no idea precisely what it was that I had just stumbled across, and I still don't, but it was huge. Some kind of alternate reality? News from the future? It seemed too big to trick. Anyway, as the email had told me, this network, this other internet, was an overlap between our world and another. I went back to the Patriot Search website and began punching in anything that came to mind: Olympics, Facebook, Human Rights Act, police powers, current world map. Slowly and surely, a picture began to form. A picture of the world beyond my laptop, and the little umbilical cord which was the cable. I was a blind man, feeling his way through a cave, bit by bit. The more I read, the more fearful I became. A lot of bad shit had happened. I have neither time nor the patience to list everything here. You can't expect me to describe an entirely separate historical timeline, but I'll leave you a few examples. Police in the United States and UK were gradually being phased out, and the army was taking their place. From what I gathered, the only crimes that were properly investigated were treason and fraud, leaving all kinds of depraved killers and perverts free to do as they pleased. Some had even gained fan followings. I stumbled across one website dedicated to someone called the Dockyard Butcher. It had an image and a video gallery in the sidebar, and the things I saw made me feel queasy. The world was overcrowded, but not just like ours. I make no exaggeration. London was ringed by shantytown slums, the sort of place you wouldn't expect to find outside of a third world country. There was so much to take in that I'm probably forgetting half of it as I type. Oh, and something happened to New York. There were plenty of records about it, dating back to the late 90s, but then they just stopped, like it never existed. I couldn't find it in any of the maps. No discussions on any public forums about it either. I'm not sure if it's an isolated example or one of the many places to officially stop existing, but if anyone decides to look for themselves, then it's something interesting to investigate. I really recommend that you don't, though. A shrill bleep startled me. I'd left the CMD drive open after testing my connection. It was notifying me of an echoed ping. I reopened the window and, sure enough, I had been pinged. Moments later, a second ping popped up on the feed. A different source, though. The IP address was listed beside the notification. As far as we know, the building's the only one with a connection to the network, meaning that they hadn't come from this side. As I tried to grasp what was happening, a third ping appeared. Something clicked inside my head, and I felt my stomach turn. I had grasped blindly into the unknown, and now the unknown was grasping back. People from this other world had felt my clumsy investigations and were, in turn, investigating us. This was when my laptop went crazy. The mouse stopped responding to my usage. In fact, the pointer disappeared completely from the screen. The internet browser instantly froze up, and then forwarded me to another website. A blank white screen which loaded almost instantaneously. A file began to load itself into the machine. Its icon a pale, pupil-devoid eyeball, and its name a blank space. Though I wasn't hugely worried about the well-being of the old laptop, the idea of something from the other place was pushing its way into my reality, which was strangely horrifying. I leapt to my feet, and just as the download reached the 75% mark, I yanked free the cable from the wall. A squeal of static emerged from the computer speakers, and the download bar quivered, frozen on screen. I had dropped my cigarette in a rush, so I sat back, lit another one, and stared at the socket on the wall. Scratched and slightly deformed due to my rather rough exit from the world that lay beyond it. I have no idea what the eye from the program was for, and I didn't try to find out. I took the laptop apart then and there, and then carefully ground each piece below my heel. All that's left of the inner workings is a scattering of green plastic shards and bent metal. As far as what the future holds for the old climate research building, I have no idea. Gwynedd Council have been talking about demolishing it down for years now, and perhaps one day they'll pull their fingers out and get around to it. I'll be honest, when it's nothing but rubble and ashes, I won't be mourning its loss. Until that time, the socket, a little window into the unknown, is still there. If you desperately want to investigate, I can't stop you. Still, it's plain to see that whatever world the network represents is a cruel and malicious shadow of our own. Just a word of warning to any other would-be pioneers, however. If they try to make contact, ignore them. And if they try to get through, deny them. Scientists believe that should alternate universes exist, then it would be almost impossible to knowingly transfer physical objects from one to the other. Then again, though data is simply electrical impulses, energy, that such a force should be exchangeable between two realities simply paving their ways for one another, far less desirable visitors. I believe that whatever possibilities the network holds for us are outweighed by the risk. Because what lies across the veil is not some monster or demon, but a humanity turned cold and hateful. It knows how we think, and it knows we'll come back. If all this hasn't dissuaded you from exploring, then please, be careful. As drops of rain were pouring on my window, I was browsing the internet and watching videos. The storm outside was getting heavier, and the sound of rain kind of freaked me out. As the thunder began to boom, the Wi-Fi connection died. I had no internet now. What a terrible night. This is going to be one boring night, I told myself. While I was searching for old photos on my computer, an activity which seemed to be the only way to have fun, my laptop just shut down. The screen went black, and that was it. Later on, I managed to turn it on again, after I removed the hard disk and saw that there was no problem with it. Windows started as normal, then the desktop popped up. I remember having all sorts of games and folders on my desktop, but now they were all gone. I thought that the problem that caused it was due to the shutdown, which had also damaged my files and memory. I was in a rage now, because I had lost lots of important work for school now due to this shit laptop. I did a final check to see if everything had been really deleted. As I was browsing through folders, I found a strange file name. Kevin's clip. I have never saved that to my computer. I thought it was some kind of prank. But I clicked on it and it opened. Weird. Now there was this opening scene with a close shot of a field, with colored flowers on it. Then the camera zoomed out and I could see a kid, about 8 or something. Long dark hair, blue eyes. I was so confused I couldn't say he was cute or creepy anymore. He ran onto the field and he kept smiling. He wasn't even blinking. For 30 seconds or so he just smiled and ran forward. And then he suddenly stopped. The scene cut out to a place in front of the child, like a small deck. There were 4 chairs, and on each of them was a person. I could see their faces. They were smiling, with the same absent look as the child before. I didn't get this until the camera zoomed out on each of them and I could see their entire bodies. The first one, a woman, was shot. A bullet in the head. Blood was flowing down her face. The other ones were also dead, but the last one caught my attention. He had the same blue eyes as the child in the field. He had the same dark hair. He had to be related to the child. Then the shot switched to their feet. Next to each, there was a cardboard sign on which was written, Mom, Brother, Sister, and the last one was Daddy, just as I expected. The son of a bitch killed this family. Then I heard a voice behind the camera, laughing. It was a sick man's laugh, a twisted mix of sobbing and crooked laughing. And I was terrified now. The video was just sick. The final frames were of a child, staring at me and smiling, of course. The camera was shaking and then the kid stabbed the person who was filming with a kitchen knife or something. Blood started to flow and the camera dropped, but it was still filming. There was another chair on the wooden deck. The kid sat on it and a distorted reverse violin started to play. He smiled at the camera on the ground and then slit his throat with a knife, giggling. Blood covered the camera and the music stopped. Then this strange nonsense text ended the clip. As little Kevin completed his mission, he looked to him and smiled. Then the video ended. Who the hell was he? What was the whole purpose of that video? Was it real? I threw my hard disk away in the rain through the window and replaced it the next day. I do not want anyone to see the video. If you ever find it, delete it immediately. It took me months to get over the horrible feeling of that smiling monster on the screen. "18-year-old Anna couldn't imagine her life getting any better. She was a straight-A student, had a great family, and an amazing boyfriend. She was a very simple girl, not like the others. She'd much rather be playing video games with her boyfriend than hanging out with friends or going to parties. Her boyfriend, Alex, was everything to her. There was no way that she could imagine life without him. The only problem in Anna and Alex's relationship was their distance. Anna lived in West Oklahoma and Alex lived in Florida. Their physical separation was agonizing, but it all made their emotional connection much stronger. They loved each other so greatly. The only term Anna could use to describe him was soulmate. However, there were things about Alex that simply infuriated Anna. His sleeping habits were not of the greatest. Alex and she would stay up late, especially during their summer breaks. Usually up till 3 or 4 in the morning, but eventually Anna would go to sleep. What made her angry was that Alex would never follow in her footsteps. He would always stay up much later, until 8 in the morning or so, but the worst was when he decided he wasn't going to sleep until noon. This angered Anna because that meant that he would sleep till 8 at night. Why couldn't he go to sleep when she did? His choice made their time together lessen. She would be asleep while he was awake, and he would be asleep while she was awake. One Saturday morning, Anna awoke fairly early compared to her normal noon morning. It was around 9:30. She hadn't had a lot of sleep considering the fact that she had crashed at 4. Anna nowhere near expected Alex to be awake, and upon checking her phone, her suspicions were correct. No messages. It didn't bother her. She wasn't expecting him to be. The night before had been a lovely one. After hours of gaming and following hours of lying in bed, Skyping the night had truly been fulfilling. Anna was a bit of a coward, and the comfort of her boyfriend's face and voice kept her company as she lay in bed in the dim light, was all she needed to sleep without restlessness. The two lovers had decided that after Anna fell asleep, Alex would end the chat so that her phone would kick back to the Skype homepage and her phone would lock and get a good night's rest along with her. And they had done just that. Anna did her morning routine and had some breakfast before she checks her Skype history. I read that the chat was ended at 6 in the morning. Alex must have fallen asleep for a while before ending the chat. She shrugs and goes about her day, figuring Alex must have fallen asleep after the chat's end and he would probably wake up around 2 or 3. She deeply missed him while she waited for him to wake up, but she watches TV and plays a game to distract herself. It was until 3:30 when she decided to text him for the first time. Usually she restrains herself so his phone doesn't wake him up. So at 3:34 she sent to Alex, "You're very sleepy today, aren't you?" Of course, no response. She didn't expect one, so she waited a while to send another. 4:46 p.m. "Time to wake up, baby." No response. Again, she wasn't expecting much, so she waits a bit longer until she sends another. 5:28 p.m. "I knew my falling asleep on Skype wasn't a good idea. I kept you up too late making you wait for me." To her frustration, there is once again no answer. Whatever. He must have went to bed later than she had originally thought. She decided to watch a little bit of TV before deciding to go and play games. Upon starting up the game and submerging into her story, her mind begins to wander back to her sleeping boyfriend. She always had an overactive imagination. She hadn't heard from him since last night. What if something was wrong? What if something bad had happened? She began to imagine what it might be like without him, and that scared her. So she quickly sends another message at 8:17 p.m. "I'm getting really worried about you." And to her horror, there was no message. She tried to suppress her mind and focus on her game, but her thoughts were too strong. Her skill in the game began to alter and she died constantly. She tried to concentrate, but she's not worried about it. She's worried about Alex. She feels her thoughts driving deeper and deeper, and she starts to panic even more. 8:25 p.m. "Alex, please get up, I'm scared." Nothing. Her thoughts began to drive her to tears, and within a few minutes, she sent several messages. At 8:33 p.m. "I'm crying now. Are you happy?" 8:35 p.m. "I'm having a serious panic attack." 8:38 p.m. "Don't do this to me, you ass." No answer. By then, her stomach is hurting and she is almost positive that she is about to be sick. She feels faint beyond compare. Her mind is swimming with ifs. 8:45 p.m. "Wake up." 8:50 p.m. "I beg you, Alex, please wake up." 9 o'clock. "Please." 9:06 p.m. "Wake up. Just please wake up." By then, her pain is radiating through her. She is no longer hysterical. Instead, she is in a calm state filled with pain that she has never felt before. She closes her eyes, trying to relax. Instead, she is sent into a deep nightmare reflecting her fears of Alex's death. She is jerked awake. The clock above the TV says 12 o'clock a.m. exactly. Her phone is lit up, and painting across the screen was the word, "One new text message." The chime of it must have been what woke her. "Thank the Lord," she whispers frantically as she picks up the phone and quickly looks at the message. From Alex, at 12 o'clock a.m. "I love you." Tears fog in her eyes as anger surges inside her. She's been frantic all day, and all he has to say about those messages is, "I love you." Forget him. Anna turns her phone off and goes to sleep in anger. And when she awakes the next day and turns her phone back on, there's one voicemail left on her phone. She calls her voicemail and punches in her security code.
One voicemail from
The electronic voice reads off.
Alex, Sunday, June 15th, 2013, at 8:37 a.m.
That bastard better be apologizing, Anna hisses to herself.
Anna?
A female voice says on the recorded message. She sounds shaky and broken.
This is Alex's mom.
She heard a sob.
Alex passed away in his sleep last night.
She began to sob,
I'm so sorry.
and the phone clicks. Anna's body goes rigid. She can't breathe. She can't feel. And everything seems numb. And she collapses. An autopsy of Alex's body shows the cause of death was a brain hemorrhage that caused him to sleep into a coma shortly after he went to sleep at 7 in the morning. He had stayed in a coma, looking as if he was asleep until 11:58 p.m. when his body gave out. His brain shut down, and he peacefully slipped away. Lynn and I met in 2008. She was from a very small town in Washington with a population of less than 500. I was working my way through college as an event bartender in Portland. Lynn's cousin was getting married in Portland, and as fate would have it, the wedding reception was held at an upscale hotel on the Columbia River, where I frequently tended to small wine and beer bars. I noticed her immediately, as I often notice women that I quickly convince myself are too beautiful to even date someone like me. Eventually, as the night went on, she made her way over to the bar and ordered a white wine. We talked for a while about Portland. I sweated profusely, as I tended to do around girls like her. She would be spending the next 2 days in the city, and I took a few moments telling her about the most interesting sights to see and things to do in the town. "Wow, you should be my personal tour guide," she said, grabbing my arm and smiling. This happened to me so infrequently that I really had no idea how to react, so I mumbled, "Sure, what time?" and laughed nervously to hedge in the event that she was joking. "How about 10:30 tomorrow morning?" she replied. And so I started my relationship with Lynn. She was infectious, with a personality that was so innocent and warm. I immediately fell in love with her. There were a few issues that we would have to work through. She was still in Washington, and I was finishing school in Oregon. Lynn was Vietnamese, with a very traditional father who would never approve of her having a white boyfriend. She lived alone in the house with her father, and her mother had passed away several years earlier, so going to Yarrow Point to visit her was out of the question. So we hatched up the plan that she would come to see me every 3 weeks under the guise of a prestigious internship program. Being in a long-distance relationship, we spoke on the phone and texted constantly. When high-speed internet finally came to her small town in Washington, I surprised her with a webcam for her computer so we could have an even better means of long-distance communication. In the back of my mind, I was always looking for ways to be with her, as even after 2 years of dating, I was paranoid a girl as beautiful as her would eventually find someone better to share her life with. In 2010, Lynn's father passed away suddenly in his sleep from a heart attack. He was everything to her, and she was heartbroken. When she returned from Florida, where the funeral was held and her father buried, she was alone in the house where she had lost both of her parents. With Lynn's father deceased, she was open to finally allowing me to come to Washington to see her, which we planned on doing in a few weeks after my college finals. One night, during our usual bedtime conversation, Lynn mentioned to me that her father had been acting strangely in the days leading up to his death. She explained that he had taken up checking up on her multiple times throughout the day and night, and scattering religious artifacts throughout the house. This behavior, she said, was highly uncharacteristic of him. Vietnamese culture and religion was something foreign to me, and at various points Lynn had mentioned things like that I normally wrote off as just being a little silly. She explained to me that being in the house alone without her dad was emotional and maybe playing tricks on her. She hated the feeling of being so alone. She told me that being able to see me on her webcam was the closest thing that she had to family, and asking that I promise to never turn off the webcam. She meant the world to me, so I was happy to oblige. A few days passed, and it was now the Tuesday before the weekend when I finally came to see her in Washington. We spent our bedtime webcam sessions excitedly talking about our plans and dozed off with my head on the table in mid-conversation. It had been a long day, and when I woke up, I saw Lynn sleeping on my screen and stumbled off to bed. At 3:00 a.m., my cell phone began to ring. Disoriented, I rolled over, took a look at the clock, and knew that it could only be her. She took great pleasure in waking me up in the middle of the night to let me know that she had gotten a drink of water or had an amusing dream. Anyone else would have gotten an earful from me, but her flirtatious giggle made me feel lucky to have a much-needed sleep interrupted. "I had a nightmare," Lynn gasped. "You danced in front of my friends." She burst into laughter. "What are you doing up so late, honey? You've got to work in the morning," I said. "I was thirsty and went downstairs to get a drink of water." "Great. Well, we really should get back to sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." "All right," she conceded. "Hey, by the way, don't After a few crackles and a brief burst of static, the call disconnected. I hated Lynn's phone. She had an old flip phone that dropped calls with no rhyme or reason at least 3 times a day. I held down the number 1 on my own phone, my speed dial for Lynn. No ring, just straight to voicemail. I tried to call several times, and each time again, it went straight to voicemail. I was exhausted, and though I loved Lynn to death, to be honest, I just wanted to go back to sleep. My eyelids hung heavy. A little annoyed, I decided to walk out to my kitchen for a quick drink of water. The 2 glasses of wine that I had drank before bed left me with a little bit of a dry mouth. As I rinsed the glass and went to place it in the dishwasher, out of the corner of my eye I saw movement on the glow of a laptop perched on my dining room table. It was the webcam. 2 fluffy brown paws were making a swimming motion directly in front of her camera. As I got closer, I saw a close-up of 2 grinning faces, one of that silly dog of hers, and the other of my giggling girlfriend, who knew that eventually, after being unable to make phone contact, I would wander out to the webcam to say goodnight. I wouldn't put it past her to turn the phone off on purpose to elaborately stage this scene. Me, standing in my underwear at 3 a.m. on a work night, half asleep staring at my girl and a puppy on the webcam. I waved goodnight, and she kissed the lens of the webcam and pulled away. And I froze. I wiped my eyes and looked again. There. It's standing in the corner of the room. It's staring at her. Wrinkled, angry, twisted mouth, hateful eyes. What the fuck? Hateful eyes. And watched her. 2 hours later, I woke up on the dining room floor. I had a ringing in my ears and a knot in the back of my head. I immediately knew what had happened. It wasn't the first time. Sudden extreme stress has given me panic attacks and blackouts from time to time. I had never felt such fear when what had happened came rushing back, and I nearly had a second panic attack when my thoughts turned to Lynn. I loved her more than anything in the world. It took me several moments to summon the courage to look in the direction of my laptop. And when I finally did, the screensaver had long since turned out. I looked away from the screen as I flicked the touchpad with my shaking finger. It took me another 2 minutes to open my eyes. Lynn laid sleeping in her bed. She looked so peaceful, sleeping in her bed. Facing towards the webcam, as frightened and confused as I was, relief at her safety gave me a sense of comfort as I desperately tried to process what had happened. Maybe the wine had hit me harder than I thought. Maybe I slipped and fell on the slick floor, and it had all been a nightmare. I stared at her. I loved her. Maybe more than even I realized. So peaceful and beautiful as she slept. The light of her television danced across the room and illuminated the bed. As I watched on, her hand began to move. Slowly, unnaturally. She was sleeping, but her fingers crawled across the bed slowly until they reached something. It was her cell phone. Her hand moved like a spider, fingers popping in several directions across the keys. What the hell? My phone was vibrating. New message. Don't. New message. Turn. New message. Off. New message. The. New message. Web. New message. Cam. Complete terror set in as the messages came across the screen on my cell phone. Don't turn off the web cam. As I glanced back at my laptop, horror overcame me as slowly a shadow crept across the floor. Something was crossing in front of the television, moving closer to Lynn. I told myself it was just her dog, right? The color drained from my face when I noticed the puppy sleeping in the far corner of the room. I picked up the phone and I dialed Lynn. I didn't know what I was going to tell her, but I knew that she needed to get out of there immediately and never go back. Damn it. Straight to voicemail. That stupid old phone of hers. The full shadow now hung completely over Lynn. Her hand jerked, flipped open her cell phone, and my phone was ringing. I answered. Lynn, can you hear me? You need to... A burst of loud static forced my phone reflexively away from my ear. On the webcam, I saw Lynn's lips begin to move. Her eyes were shut, but she was speaking. I heard her voice come across the phone, but something wasn't right. She was speaking, but a second, deeper voice echoed hers in perfect unison.
Don't turn off the webcam. Agramon would like to see you. Don't turn off the webcam. Agramon is ready for you now.
Who? What does he want? I yelled in desperation.
He wants to eat your skin.
And the line disconnected. The shadow across Lynn's bed changed directions. It started moving away from the bed, and towards her laptop, and towards the webcam. As the shadow moved closer, small streams of gray liquid rolled towards the lens. The images came across my monitor began to shake violently. It was almost here. I could now see the top of its head. It was crawling towards me, wet strings of silver and black hair hanging over its face. I remembered those hateful eyes, and I lost control of my bladder as it slowly began to tilt its head up. And then I did it. In panic, I slammed my laptop shut and threw it against the hard tile floor before collapsing to the ground. I wished for a panic attack to take my consciousness and end this nightmare, but it did not come. I crawled to the panel of switches a few feet up the wall and turned on every light that I could. I noticed the bottle of wine still open on the kitchen counter and drank most of it down in a single swallow. I reached up and pulled open my apartment door and stumbled across the threshold, extending half of my body into the common hallway so I wouldn't feel so alone. A pathetic coward sprawled out on the concrete. My phone began to ring. I crawled to it. Lynn's name was flashing on the caller ID. I held it in my hand, paralyzed by fear. And then the ringing stopped. I took another mouthful of wine and mustered the courage to call back. It went straight to voicemail. And then again, as I tried to call. Eventually, the shock and drowsiness from the wine got the better of me, and I passed out on the floor after making a few more attempts. When I awoke several hours later, despite the broken laptop and empty bottle, I wanted to believe that it was just some sort of horrible nightmare. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw blue flashing lights on my cell phone. You have one new voicemail. My hand trembled as I dialed the voicemail and entered my passcode. The message was time-stamped, and it was from the missed call that I had from Lynn before passing out. Her voice. She was in tears and frightened as though I had never heard her before.
You promised. Why? Why did you turn off the webcam? His tongue burns.
With a crackle, the message ended. 2 years have passed since that night. I never tried to contact Lynn again. I never called her work to see if that she came in the following morning. I never made it to Yarrow Point in Washington where she lived. She was my soulmate, and I let this happen. I was probably right on the night when we met that I told myself I wasn't man enough for her. The only reason that I'm telling this story today, under the cowardly veil of anonymity, is because my drug and alcohol counselor thinks that it'd be a good idea for me. So here it is. I made the decision to let the love of my life face an unimaginable nightmare to spare myself. And the worst part is that I may not even regret it. So, now if you'll excuse me, I think I need another drink. Have you ever been in a position where you find yourself questioning everything you believe to be true? Perhaps it was something religious or political. Maybe someone you trusted did something to undermine your trust in them. Maybe someone close to you turned out to be a monster. When I was a sophomore in high school, my father began what he referred to as a project in our basement. He never specified what this project entailed, only that it was for his business and whatever went on down there was to be kept strictly confidential. Hell, he went as far as to soundproof the basement walls. As far as my social life, I had a small group of friends at school, some of whom were into all kinds of kinky, bizarre, and sometimes outright disgusting pornography, namely 2 Girls, 1 Cup. I typically tuned out whenever the subject came up as I didn't spend much time on the internet. Typically, I would just look up NFL or NBA highlights, and social media sites like Twitter and Facebook never really appealed to me. One day, my friend Kevin brought up a subject that I had never considered before and has come to haunt me ever since. Something he referred to as the dark web. What he described was horrific. Hitman advertisements, videos of animal abuse and mutilation, crush porn, and realistic, or possibly even genuine, depictions of sexual assault. I'm not sure why, but his descriptions of this dark web piqued my curiosity. Could such a fucked up place truly exist on the internet? Kevin invited us over for the weekend so he could show us what he was talking about. We agreed to come over. Saturday came and Kevin had managed to hack into the dark web. It didn't take very long for the rest of us to see that he was telling the truth. All of the awful things that he described to us were on full display. It was nauseating to say the least. After about 20 minutes of scrolling down, Kevin came across a link to an untitled live stream. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the link. The screen changed to pitch black, and after a short time, we were greeted by a digital clock gradually counting down. When it reached 0, the numbers disappeared and the black screen remained. For the next 30 seconds or so, we heard a deep and raspy breathing sound. Eventually, a beam of light appeared, presumably from a flashlight, and it illuminated some strange man wearing a hideous mask, a top hat, a suit, and a cape. When he spoke, his voice was distorted, I'm guessing to help keep his identity hidden.
Good evening,
The man finally spoke.
and thank you all for joining us this evening. You may call me Hawkins. And boy, do we have a show for you tonight. A pair of helpless victims.
When the rest of the screen became illuminated, we saw a small room with the walls painted red. On the back wall were 2 women, one very obese and the other in pretty good shape. Both of them nude and trapped to the wall in mounted cufflinks. Hawkins approached the very obese woman and stroked her face very creepily.
Oh, you're one ugly, disgusting bitch. Ugly creatures like yourself don't deserve to share the world with the pretty ones.
He then glanced at the second, more attractive woman,
Am I right?
and she said nothing.
I have something very special planned for you, sweetheart. But first, let us deal with the ugly one.
I began feeling nervous. I was hoping this was all a strange act, but with everything that we had been shown on the dark web so far, I wasn't too sure of that.
Garden shears.
Hawkins shouted. A pair of hands appeared from off-camera to give the masked man some garden shears, and then approached the woman and pried the shears open.
What a pity. If only you were better looking. I might not have to do this.
And with that, he began cutting into the woman's breasts, leading to deafening screams. My friends and I all gasped in shock. One of the women began to vomit. He then brought his attention to her ankles and tried cutting through them, but couldn't.
No matter. Chainsaw.
I felt queasy at the mention of the chainsaw. After receiving the item, he cut off the woman's feet and then began cutting into her abdomen, leading to blood and guts sprayed everywhere. The obese woman passed out from shock while the second woman also began sobbing in terror. Eventually, Hawkins shut off the chainsaw.
Let her bleed. Now, as for you... Whip.
The unseen assistant handed him a whip and he proceeded to give the second woman a number of brutal lashings. When he was finished flagellating her, he released her from her cufflinks. She dropped to the floor very suddenly, and before she could get up, Hawkins kicked her very hard in the abdomen. It was at this point when Kevin noticed a chat box on the side. Most of the messages from viewers were expressing utter glee and satisfaction at the horrific sight. Outraged, Kevin typed in the chat box, "What the hell is wrong with you people? I warn you, the police will hear of this." "Hey boss, check out this message." Hawkins kicked the woman again and walked over to the webcam.
A tough guy, huh? Gonna call the cops on me. Kevin,
It was like a ton of bricks was dropped on all of us. Did the man really just mention my friend's name? Suddenly, a box appeared containing his full name and address, and Kevin was froze in terror.
Whatever. I have all the information I need on you. Looks like I'll be seeing you soon.
Hawkins walked away back towards the woman. Kevin finally shut the computer off and curled up in a ball, shaking uncontrollably. The rest of our friends bailed, but I chose to stay behind even though I was frightened out of my wits. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, but Kevin did not get any sleep at all. He was a nervous wreck for the next few days, unable to concentrate in class and staying quiet at the lunch table when he was normally very talkative. Several weeks passed and he began to mellow out and return to his old self. The situation on the dark web appeared to have blown over completely. Until one Friday night, that is. I was watching the 10 o'clock news when a report broke out about a mass homicide that occurred a few miles away. I was shocked and horrified when I saw a reporter standing outside what I recognized as Kevin's house. His mother, father, and both his siblings were found dead, and Kevin himself was reported as missing. Oh my God. They got him, I said to myself. I woke up in the middle of the night to relieve myself when I saw my father reach the top of the staircase. His clothing was covered in dirt, which I found very odd. Dad, it's 2 a.m. What are you doing up? Fixing a busted sprinkler. At 2 a.m.? Why not? Is there some law that says that I can't? I sighed. Whatever, Dad. I did my business and then went back to sleep. The next afternoon, my dad went out to run some errands. While he was gone, I suddenly decided out of the blue to check out the basement. Looking back, I'm not sure why I picked this particular moment to be a naughty boy. I didn't usually have a rebellious streak. But what the hell? I wanted to see what the secrecy was all about. I reached the bottom of the stairs and began checking out the basement. So far, nothing looked out of the ordinary from the last time that I set foot down there, aside from a few items being in a different place. Then I looked underneath the staircase and I noticed something that definitely was not there before. A door. I walked to the door and opened it, and a light turned on automatically. And what I saw shook me to my very core. It was a small room with red walls and mounted cufflinks. In a corner, I saw blood-stained garden shears and a chainsaw. On the wall next to the door was a desk with a computer and a webcam. I also saw the ugly mask. The same mask worn by the man I only knew as Hawkins. I was standing in the same room where the awful live stream took place weeks earlier. I heard my father's voice shouting upstairs when he noticed the basement door was open. He came down cussing up a storm, and then he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing in the entry of his secret room and holding the mask. We stared at each other in awkward silence for a long time. My father was arrested shortly thereafter. He had soundproofed the walls to prevent the possibility of anyone's screams from being heard around the house. My friend Kevin and those 2 women from the live streams were buried in the backyard, their bodies thoroughly dismembered and laid on top of one another. I guess that explains my father's late-night yard work. As to why he took the name Hawkins as his dark web identity, he confessed to murdering another man back in 1995. The man's name was Carl Hawkins. 5 years have passed since I discovered the truth about my father. I haven't paid him one visit in prison. Eventually, he will be executed by means of lethal injection. I wish I could say I'm saddened by this. He's still my father after all. But I feel cold and indifferent. Now I am left to wonder whether he passed on some kind of bad seed to me. I fear that one day I will snap and become the same kind of monster that he had become. There's also a matter of my father's assistant. Who is he? My father refused to give away his identity. Makes me wonder if the mysterious assistant had begun his own sick little show on the deep web. I don't intend to find out. I'm never going on the deep web. Ever again.